Hello there, fellow truth seekers and insomniacs. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I want to know, how was your day? What time is it where you're listening from? Are you tucked away in a cosy bedroom in Ohio, walking the late-night streets of London, or perhaps watching the sunrise from your apartment in Tokyo? Wherever you are in this interconnected world of ours, I'm glad you're here. And hey, if you're enjoying these deep dives into the shadows of our reality, don't forget to subscribe to Sleep Theories. We're building a community of people who aren't afraid to ask the hard questions. Now, let's begin. My name is Julian Stone, and I used to believe I was making the world a better place. For 12 years, I worked as a senior policy analyst at the Arcus Foundation, one of those shadowy think tanks that most people have never heard of, but whose fingerprints are on every major global initiative of the past 3 decades. We had offices in Geneva, New York, and Brussels, gleaming towers of glass and steel, where brilliant minds gathered to solve humanity's greatest challenges. Or so I thought. The Arcus Foundation's mission statement was poetry and corporate speak, advancing global harmony through unified policy frameworks and sustainable governance solutions. We consulted with the UN on climate initiatives, advised the IMF on economic stability measures, and provided research support to the World Economic Forum's annual gatherings in Davos. I felt like I was part of something important, something that mattered. I specialised in demographic transition models, studying how populations respond to policy changes, economic pressures, and social interventions. My reports influenced food distribution programs in sub-Saharan Africa, urban planning initiatives in Southeast Asia, and immigration policies across the European Union. The work was intellectually stimulating, well compensated, and came with the satisfaction of knowing that my analysis was helping shape a more equitable world. That was before March 15th, 2024. Before I discovered what we were really building, the day started like any other. I arrived at our Geneva office at 7:30 a.m, grabbed my usual double espresso from the lobby cafe, and settled into my corner workspace on the 14th floor. The Alps were visible through my window, their snow-capped peaks catching the morning light. A view that never failed to remind me how fortunate I was to be there. My supervisor, Dr. Elena Vasquez, stopped by my desk around 9 a.m. Elena was a former World Bank economist with connections that reached into every major international organisation. She had recruited me personally from Columbia University, where I'd completed my PhD in applied policy analysis. Over the years, she'd become something like a mentor to me. "Julian, we have a situation," she said, her usually composed demeanour showing cracks of stress. "There was a security breach in our server infrastructure last night. Nothing critical was compromised, but we need a full audit of our internal document database. I'm putting you in charge of the cleanup." This wasn't unusual. Think tanks like ours were constant targets for corporate espionage, activist hackers, and foreign intelligence services. Our cybersecurity protocols were robust, but no system was perfect. I'd handled similar situations before, cataloguing sensitive documents, ensuring proper classification levels, and identifying any potential vulnerabilities in our information architecture. "What kind of breach are we talking about?" I asked, already pulling up our security monitoring dashboard. "Attempted penetration of our archived research database. The intrusion was blocked, but it triggered an automatic review protocol. Legal wants everything above classification level 7 to be personally verified by senior staff." Elena handed me a secure tablet loaded with administrative credentials. "Start with the Governance Innovation Archive. That's where our most sensitive collaborative research is stored." The Governance Innovation Archive. I'd heard references to it in high-level meetings, but had never had clearance to access it directly. My excitement at finally getting a peek behind the curtain was tempered by the tedious nature of the task ahead. Archive reviews were notoriously time-consuming. Thousands of documents to be sorted, verified, and reclassified. I spent the morning working through routine policy papers, demographic studies, and economic forecasting models. Most of it was familiar territory, research I'd either contributed to or referenced in my own work. The sun traced its arc across the sky as I methodically processed file after file. It was around 2:30 p.m. when I found it. The document was buried deep in a subfolder labelled Historical Research Initiatives, nestled between a 1997 study on European monetary integration and a 2001 analysis of post-Soviet economic transitions. The file name was innocuous: GI Archive Reset Framework version 7.pdf. But when I opened it, the blood in my veins turned to ice water. Project RESET Comprehensive Societal Restructuring Protocol. Classification level, Obsidian. Distribution, Council authorization only. Date, August 12, 1998. The document was 247 pages long. What I read in those pages would shatter everything I thought I knew about the world, about my work, and about the true nature of the organisations I'd devoted my career to serving. The executive summary was clinical in its brutality. The transition to harmonised global governance requires systematic deconstruction of existing national sovereignty frameworks, followed by controlled reconstruction under unified administrative protocols. Project RESET outlines a 5-phase implementation strategy designed to achieve this transition while maintaining public compliance and minimising resistance vectors. 5 phases. 5 stages of what could only be described as the methodical dismantling of human freedom, disguised as progressive policy initiatives. Phase 1. Digital identity infrastructure. The first phase called for the establishment of universal digital identification systems, ostensibly for improved service delivery and security. Every human being would be assigned a unique digital profile containing biometric data, financial information, health records, travel history, and behavioural analytics. The document described this as creating comprehensive individual mapping for optimised resource allocation and risk assessment. But buried in the technical specifications, the true purpose became clear. The digital ID system wasn't just about identification, it was about control, real-time tracking, automatic compliance monitoring, and the ability to instantly restrict access to banking, travel, employment, and even food distribution for anyone deemed non-compliant with social directives. Phase 2. AI-managed resource distribution. The second phase involved transitioning all essential resources, food, water, energy, housing, to centralised AI management systems. The justification was environmental sustainability and equitable distribution. The reality was something far more sinister. The document outlined algorithms that would determine individual resource allocations based on social contribution scores, behavioural compliance metrics, and demographic optimization parameters. In plain English, the system would decide who got to eat, who could access clean water, and who deserved shelter based on their usefulness to the new order and their willingness to comply with its directives. There were detailed flowcharts showing how resource restrictions could be used to modify behaviour at both individual and population levels. Hungry people, the document noted with chilling matter-of-factness, were compliant people. Phase 3. Engineered economic collapse and synthetic recovery. The third phase was perhaps the most diabolical. It called for the deliberate triggering of a global economic collapse through coordinated actions, synchronized market crashes, currency devaluations, supply chain disruptions, and debt crisis escalations. The chaos would be blamed on external factors, pandemics, climate disasters, geopolitical conflicts, or technological failures. In the aftermath of this engineered collapse, a new economic system would be introduced as the necessary solution to prevent future catastrophes. This system would be entirely digital, completely traceable, and fully controlled by the same AI networks managing resource distribution. Private property rights would be eliminated in favour of sustainable stewardship models. Individual economic autonomy would disappear. Phase 4. Unified surveillance architecture. The fourth phase involved the integration of all monitoring systems into a single, omnipresent surveillance network. Every device, every sensor, every camera would feed into a central intelligence system capable of tracking and analysing human behaviour in real time. The document described predictive intervention protocols that would identify and neutralise dissent before it could manifest as organised resistance. Potential troublemakers would be flagged by behavioural analysis algorithms and subjected to corrective interventions, everything from social isolation and economic pressure to direct psychological manipulation through targeted media exposure. Phase 5. Population normalisation protocols. The final phase was the most horrifying of all. Population normalisation was a euphemism for systematic depopulation, reducing the global human population from over 8 billion to what the document described as sustainable levels of approximately 500 million to 1 billion individuals. The methods outlined were varied and sophisticated: fertility reduction through endocrine disruptors in food and water supplies, healthcare protocols designed to increase mortality rates among low-value demographics, and what the document euphemistically called accelerated natural selection events, engineered disasters that would disproportionately affect populations deemed surplus to requirements. The document concluded with a timeline. Phase 1 had begun in 1999 with early digital ID pilots. Phase 2 would be fully implemented by 2025. Phase 3 was scheduled for 2027 to 2030. Phases 4 and 5 would be completed by 2035. I sat staring at my screen, my hands trembling. This wasn't some fringe conspiracy theory or dystopian fiction. This was a detailed operational plan, complete with budgets, timelines, implementation strategies, and success metrics. And it was dated 1998, over a quarter century ago. Looking back at the past 25 years with this knowledge was like suddenly being able to see the matrix code streaming down in green letters. Every major crisis, every solution proposed by global institutions, every erosion of privacy and freedom justified by security concerns, it all fit the pattern outlined in Project RESET, the 2001 terrorist attacks that ushered in mass surveillance programs, the 2008 financial crisis that consolidated banking power and normalised government intervention in markets, the 2020 pandemic that accelerated digital ID adoption, remote monitoring, and restrictions on movement and assembly. Each crisis followed by solutions that moved us incrementally closer to the world described in this document. I realised I had been an unwitting participant in this process. My demographic studies, my policy recommendations, my analysis of population behavioural patterns, all of it had been feeding into this larger machine. I thought I was fighting poverty and inequality. In reality, I was helping to perfect the mechanisms of human subjugation. The afternoon sun was setting behind the Alps when I finally closed the document. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Elena, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How do you have a casual conversation about quarterly budget reviews when you've just discovered that your entire profession is part of a conspiracy to enslave humanity? I needed to understand more. If this document was real, and every instinct I had told me it was, then there had to be other evidence. References to council authorization suggested a governing body overseeing the implementation. The technical specifications implied vast infrastructure investments that would leave paper trails, and the timeline suggested that we were currently in the middle of Phase 2, with Phase 3 approaching rapidly. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, Elena appeared at my cubicle. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I caught something in her eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there that morning. "How's the archive review coming along?" she asked. "Fine," I managed. "Just working through the historical research files. Nothing unusual so far." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on my computer screen. "Good. Make sure you flag anything that seems out of place. We can't afford any compliance issues with the legal review." After she left, I copied the Project RESET document to an encrypted drive. Call it insurance or call it stupidity. I knew I couldn't let this information disappear into the bureaucratic machinery of damage control. If what I'd read was true, then the fate of human civilization hung in the balance. That night I lay awake in my Geneva apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I'd discovered. Outside my window, the city hummed with the quiet activity of normal life. People returning from dinner, late commuters heading home, the distant sound of traffic on the highway, all of them oblivious to the web of control being woven around them. I thought about my colleagues at Arcus, brilliant and dedicated people who believed, as I had, that we were working toward a better world. How many of them knew the truth? How many were complicit, and how many were simply useful idiots like I had been? More disturbing was the realization that the plan was working. Digital ID systems were being rolled out globally under the banner of convenience and security. AI-managed resource distribution was being piloted in smart cities around the world. Economic instability was increasing, with more frequent market volatility and supply chain disruptions becoming the new normal. The infrastructure for total control was being built piece by piece, sold to the public as progress and innovation, and by the time people realized what they had traded away, it would be too late to resist. As dawn broke over Lake Geneva, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life forever. I was going to find out who was behind Project RESET, how far the implementation had progressed, and whether there was any way to stop what was coming. I had no idea that by opening that file, I had already marked myself for termination. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in paranoid research methodology. I couldn't use Arcus resources for obvious reasons, and I couldn't risk conducting searches from my home computer that might trigger surveillance algorithms. Instead, I developed a routine of visiting different internet cafes, public libraries, and university computer labs around Geneva, always paying with cash and never staying in one location for more than an hour. What I discovered during those weeks of clandestine investigation was both validation and horror. The language from Project RESET wasn't just theoretical. It was operational vocabulary that had been seeded into the public discourse for decades. The phrase, "Build Back Better," appeared in a 2005 United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, years before it became a mainstream political slogan. Sustainable development goals weren't just environmental initiatives, they were restructuring protocols directly lifted from the Project RESET documentation. Stakeholder capitalism wasn't a progressive business philosophy, it was the economic model described in Phase 3 of the plan. I started mapping connections, creating a network diagram that resembled a spider web of interlocking organisations, all connected by shared personnel, funding sources, and ideological frameworks. At the centre of this web were names that any political science student would recognise: the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome, and the World Economic Forum. But it was the personnel overlaps that made the pattern undeniable. The same individuals appeared on the boards of multiple organisations, moved seamlessly between government positions and private sector roles, and maintained influence networks that spanned decades. These weren't coincidences, they were evidence of coordinated long-term planning. Dr. Klaus Müller, for instance, had served on the board of the Arcus Foundation since 2003, while simultaneously holding positions with the Trilateral Commission and maintaining an advisory role with the World Economic Forum. His academic credentials were impeccable. PhD in International Relations from Harvard, former Deputy Director of the IMF. But his career trajectory revealed a pattern of strategic positioning within the exact organisations mentioned in Project RESET. Elena Vasquez, my own supervisor, had spent 3 years with the World Bank before joining Arcus. Her previous role involved developing population optimization models for developing nations, work that, in light of what I now knew, took on a sinister new meaning. The more I dug, the more I realised that the world of international policy wasn't the collegial academic environment I had believed it to be. It was a carefully orchestrated theatre, with different organisations playing complementary roles and advancing the same underlying agenda. The Bilderberg Group provided high-level strategic coordination, bringing together political leaders, corporate executives, and academic experts for closed-door discussions that never appeared in public records. The World Economic Forum served as the public face of the agenda, packaging radical social restructuring as progressive innovation and corporate responsibility. The Club of Rome provided intellectual legitimacy, producing research that supported predetermined policy conclusions. And think tanks like Arcus served as implementation arms, developing the detailed technical frameworks that transformed abstract plans into concrete policies. It was during my 4th week of investigation that I made contact with Harper. I was sitting in a small cafe near the University of Geneva, cross-referencing attendance lists from various international conferences, when I noticed someone had left a newspaper on the adjacent table. Folded inside the newspaper was a handwritten note. "You're asking the right questions, but you're asking them in the wrong places. Tomorrow, 3 p.m, Parc des Bastions, near the Reformation Wall. Come alone." My first instinct was to ignore it. Paranoia was an occupational hazard when researching conspiracy theories, and I had no way of knowing whether this was a genuine contact or an elaborate trap. But the note demonstrated knowledge of my research activities that was both impressive and terrifying. Someone had been watching me, tracking my movements, and monitoring my investigation. The next afternoon, I found myself walking through Parc des Bastions with sweaty palms and a racing heart. The Reformation Wall loomed ahead of me, a massive stone monument celebrating the Protestant Reformation, with larger-than-life statues of religious reformers who had challenged the established order of their time. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harper was waiting on a bench facing the monument. He looked to be in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a lifetime of difficult experiences. His clothing was unremarkable, a grey wool coat, dark slacks, leather shoes that had seen better days, but his eyes were alert and calculating, constantly scanning our surroundings with the practised vigilance of someone accustomed to danger. "Julian Stone," he said as I approached. It wasn't a question. I sat down beside him, maintaining the pretense of casual conversation in case we were being observed. "How do you know who I am?" "I know because I've been watching the Watchers for longer than you've been alive." His accent was British, with traces of something else, perhaps South African or Australian. "My name is Harper. I used to work for Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service until I learned some things that made continuing that work problematic." We sat in silence for a moment, watching tourists take photographs of the monument. A group of school children ran past, laughing and playing games that seemed impossibly innocent, given the conversation I was about to have. "You found the Project RESET documentation," Harper continued. "Impressive work, considering the access restrictions. Most people in your position never make it past the first layer of classification. Most people in my position, policy analysts, research coordinators, academic consultants, the intellectual workforce that powers the think tank ecosystem. You're all kept in comfortable compartments, given enough information to do your jobs effectively, but never enough to see the complete picture. It's an elegant system, really. The vast majority of people working within the network genuinely believe they're contributing to positive change." Harper reached into his coat and withdrew a slim folder. "But you've seen behind the curtain now. The question is, what do you intend to do with that knowledge?" I took the folder, glancing around to ensure we weren't attracting attention. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. The material was far more detailed than anything I had discovered during my own research. Project RESET is Phase 4 of a much larger operation, Harper explained. The planning began in the 1970s, when a group of industrialists, academics, and political leaders became convinced that democratic governance was incompatible with long-term social stability. They believed that ordinary people were too short-sighted, too emotional, and too self-interested to make rational decisions about complex global challenges. The first document in the folder was a memorandum dated 1975, bearing the letterhead of the Club of Rome. The subject line read, "Crisis of Democracy, Toward Managed Governance Solutions." The oil crisis of 1973 was a test run, Harper continued, a demonstration of how quickly modern civilization could be disrupted and how readily populations would accept authoritarian measures if they were presented as temporary emergency responses. The success of that operation convinced the planners that more comprehensive interventions were not only possible, but necessary. I flipped through pages of meeting minutes, budget allocations, and organisational charts. Names I recognised from my research appeared throughout the documentation, along with others I'd never heard of, shadowy figures who seemed to wield enormous influence while maintaining complete public anonymity. "Wars and pandemics are what they call in moments of acceleration," Harper said, "periods when normal political processes can be bypassed and fundamental changes can be implemented under the justification of emergency response. The 2001 attacks accelerated surveillance infrastructure development by at least a decade. The 2020 pandemic accelerated digital control systems by another decade." A photograph in the folder showed a group of men in expensive suits standing around a conference table. The image quality suggested it had been taken with a hidden camera. Harper pointed to a figure partially obscured by shadows. "That's Dr. Heinrich Strasser, primary architect of the population normalization protocols. Officially, he's a retired professor of demographics from the London School of Economics. Unofficially, he's the man responsible for calculating optimal population levels and developing implementation strategies for achieving those targets." The casual way Harper discussed mass depopulation sent chills down my spine. We were talking about the systematic elimination of billions of human beings, as if it were an abstract policy problem to be solved through careful planning and efficient execution. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Harper was quiet for a long moment, watching a young couple push a stroller along the path in front of us. "Because the timeline has accelerated. What was supposed to be a gradual transition over several decades is now being compressed into a few years. The planners are concerned about growing public awareness and resistance, so they've decided to move directly to Phase 3. the economic collapse scenario. He handed me a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. Everything you need to understand the current operational status is on that device. Meeting schedules, communication intercepts, financial transaction records. But be warned, accessing this information will mark you as a priority target. They won't try to discredit you or buy you off. They'll simply make you disappear. I pocketed the device, my hands trembling. What about you? How have you managed to avoid disappearing? Harper smiled grimly. I haven't. The man who used to be called Harper died in a car accident in Morocco 15 years ago, according to official records. The person sitting next to you is a ghost, and ghosts have certain advantages when it comes to moving through the world undetected. We parted ways without shaking hands or exchanging contact information. Harper simply stood up, walked away, and disappeared into the crowd of tourists and afternoon shoppers. I remained on the bench for another hour, trying to process what I had learned, and struggling with the magnitude of the decisions I now faced. That evening I examined the device Harper had given me. The interface was unlike anything I'd seen before, clearly custom-built with security features that went far beyond commercial encryption standards. The data it contained was staggering. Real-time intelligence on Project RESET implementation across multiple continents, detailed profiles of key personnel, financial flows between organisations, and most disturbing of all, operational timelines for the next phase of the plan. According to the intelligence Harper had provided, Phase 3, the engineered economic collapse, was scheduled to begin within 18 months. The trigger would be a coordinated cyber attack on critical financial infrastructure, blamed on state-sponsored hackers but actually orchestrated by the same network that had been planning global restructuring for decades. The attack would simultaneously cripple banking systems, electrical grids, supply chains and communication networks across North America and Europe. In the chaos that followed, emergency powers would be invoked, constitutional protections would be suspended, and the new digital control systems would be implemented as temporary security measures. Within 6 months of the collapse, the new economic system would be fully operational. Physical currency would be eliminated in favour of digital transactions that could be monitored, controlled, and restricted in real time. Universal basic income would be introduced, but payment would be conditional on compliance with behavioural modification programs. Private property rights would be suspended in favour of collective stewardship models managed by AI allocation algorithms. Anyone who resisted the transition would find themselves cut off from the economic system entirely, unable to buy food, unable to access shelter, unable to travel or communicate. Social pressure and biological necessity would force compliance within weeks. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. By engineering a crisis and positioning themselves as the solution, the architects of Project RESET could implement total social control while maintaining the illusion of democratic legitimacy. The public would beg for the very chains that enslaved them. As I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by the evidence of humanity's impending subjugation, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I couldn't stop what was coming. The machinery was too vast, too well coordinated, and too far advanced. But I could expose it. I could ensure that when the collapse came, at least some people would understand what was really happening and why. The real governments weren't in the Capitol buildings where tourists took photographs and school children learned about democracy. They were in conference rooms with no cameras, making decisions that would reshape human civilization according to their vision of optimal management and control. But first, I needed to learn more about the Council of Nine, the shadowy governing body that Harper had mentioned only in passing, but that seemed to represent the apex of the power structure I was investigating. What I would discover about the Council would make everything I had learned so far seem like a preparation course for the real horror show. Harper contacted me again 3 days later, this time through a more sophisticated method that demonstrated the depth of his surveillance capabilities. When I returned home from work, I found that someone had been in my apartment. Nothing was missing, nothing was damaged, but subtle signs indicated professional intrusion. A book moved slightly on my desk, a coffee cup repositioned by a few inches, the angle of my computer monitor adjusted just enough to be noticeable. On my kitchen table was a single playing card, the 9 of spades, with a time and location written on the back in precise handwriting. Thursday, 9 p.m, Jet d'eau viewing platform. The Jet d'eau was Geneva's famous water fountain, a a towering spray of lake water that had become the city's unofficial symbol. The viewing platform offered panoramic views of Lake Geneva and was typically crowded with tourists during the day, but at 9 p.m. on a Thursday in early spring it would be largely deserted. I arrived 15 minutes early, using the time to scan for potential surveillance or security threats. Harper's warnings about being marked as a priority target had left me hyper-vigilant, seeing potential enemies in every passerby and possible monitoring devices in every street camera. Harper materialised from the shadows near the platform's eastern edge, moving with the silent efficiency of someone trained in covert operations. He wore different clothes than during our first meeting, but the same calculating alertness animated his features. "You've been researching the Council of Nine," he said without preamble. "I can tell because your digital footprint shows specific query patterns that correlate with Council-related information architecture." I hadn't mentioned the Council during our previous conversation, which meant Harper had been monitoring my online activities despite my precautions. The realization was both impressive and unsettling. "How do you know what I've been researching?" "Because I built some of the monitoring systems that track research patterns related to sensitive topics. Before I became a ghost, I spent 12 years developing psychological analysis algorithms for MI6. We called it cognitive fingerprinting, the ability to identify individual researchers based on their information-seeking behaviours." Harper handed me a waterproof envelope sealed with what appeared to be tamper-evident tape. "The Council of Nine represents the operational command structure for Project R ESET. They're not the architects. Those individuals died decades ago, but they're the executors responsible for implementing the final phases." The envelope contained photographs that had obviously been taken with sophisticated surveillance equipment. The images showed a conference room that looked like something from a high-end corporate retreat. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of what appeared to be a mountain landscape. But it was the occupants of the room that made my blood run cold. 9 individuals sat around the table, their faces partially obscured by shadows that seemed strategically positioned to prevent clear identification. Despite the lighting conditions, I could make out enough detail to recognise several figures from my research. Dr. Klaus Müller from the Arcus Foundation, a woman who appeared to be Dr. Margaret Thornfield from the World Economic Forum's Executive Board, and others whose faces seemed familiar but whose identities I couldn't immediately place. These photographs were taken during a C9 emergency protocol meeting 6 months ago, Harper explained. The audio quality from that particular session wasn't optimal, but we managed to capture enough to understand the current operational parameters. He handed me a small audio device with earbuds attached. "This is a compilation of intercepted communications from various council sessions over the past 2 years. I should warn you, what you're about to hear will fundamentally change your understanding of how power operates in the modern world." I inserted the earbuds and pressed play. The audio quality was variable, ranging from crystal clear to barely audible, but the content was unmistakably authentic. The first segment featured a woman's voice with a slight Germanic accent. "Phase 2? Implementation is proceeding ahead of schedule in North America and Western Europe. Digital ID adoption rates are exceeding projections by 23%, and AI resource management pilots are showing promising compliance metrics." A male voice responded, "What about resistance indicators?" The psychological analysis models predicted higher levels of public pushback by this stage. "Resistance has been effectively channeled into harmless outlets," the woman replied. "Social media algorithms are directing dissent toward peripheral issues, cultural conflicts, partisan political divisions, environmental activism. The core infrastructure development continues without meaningful opposition." The recording shifted to what appeared to be a different meeting. The audio quality was clearer, allowing me to distinguish individual speakers more easily. "The timeline for Phase 3 has been moved up," announced a voice I recognised as belonging to Dr. Klaus Müller. "Recent polling data suggests that public awareness of systematic restructuring is approaching critical thresholds. We need to initiate the collapse scenario before organised resistance can develop." Another voice, older and more gravelly, expressed concern. "Acceleration carries significant risks. If the synthetic recovery process is implemented too quickly, it could trigger the kind of popular uprising that the entire operation was designed to prevent." "The risk analysis has been updated," Muller responded. "Current societal conditioning levels indicate that the majority of the population will accept authoritarian measures if they're presented as temporary responses to existential threats. The 2020 compliance experiments exceeded all expectations. The recording continued for over an hour, revealing operational details that confirmed Harper's earlier warnings. The cyber attack that would trigger Phase 3 was being developed by a contractor called Prometheus Systems, a private cybersecurity firm with deep ties to intelligence agencies in multiple countries. The attack would be sophisticated enough to cripple critical infrastructure while leaving forensic evidence pointing to foreign state actors. But it was the discussion of Phase 5, the population normalization protocols, that left me physically nauseated. Demographic optimization cannot be achieved through voluntary measures, stated a voice, with what sounded like an Eastern European accent. The behavioural modification programs have been successful in reducing fertility rates, but not to levels consistent with sustainability targets. The healthcare integration protocols offer more direct intervention capabilities, replied another speaker. Selective service rationing, modified treatment algorithms, and enhanced mortality acceleration for non-productive demographic segments. They were discussing mass murder with the same clinical detachment that I had once used to analyse statistical models. Billions of human lives reduced to data points in an optimization algorithm designed to achieve their vision of sustainable population levels. The final segment of the recording was the most chilling of all. It featured what appeared to be a briefing on something called the Consciousness Integration Project, a psychological warfare operation designed to prepare the surviving population for permanent subjugation. Individual autonomy is incompatible with managed governance systems, explained a voice that seemed artificially modulated to prevent identification. The transition to collective consciousness algorithms will be facilitated through neurochemical interventions delivered via water supply modification and atmospheric aerosol deployment. What about cognitive resistance patterns? Asked another speaker. Resistance requires individual identity coherence. The consciousness integration protocols will systematically deconstruct individual psychological frameworks and replace them with collective identity matrices. Within one generation, the concept of personal autonomy will be psychologically incomprehensible to the surviving population. I removed the earbuds and handed the device back to Harper, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and terror. What I had heard wasn't just evidence of a conspiracy, it was evidence of a plan to erase human consciousness itself, transforming the survivors of their depopulation program into biological robots incapable of independent thought. Now you understand the stakes, Harper said quietly. This isn't about political control or economic manipulation. It's about the fundamental nature of human existence. They're planning to transform our species into something that can be managed like livestock. The lights of Geneva sparkled across Lake Geneva, a testament to human creativity and achievement that would soon be subordinated to the algorithmic control systems of the Council of Nine. Every light represented families, dreams, aspirations, and individual lives that would be extinguished or enslaved, according to the optimization calculations of psychopaths who had convinced themselves that they were saving the world. "What can we do?" I asked. Harper's expression was grim. The operational infrastructure is too advanced to be stopped through conventional means, but there might be a way to disrupt their timeline and create opportunities for organized resistance. He explained that the Council's power derived from coordination and secrecy. Their plans required precise timing and public ignorance to succeed. If the implementation schedule could be disrupted and their methods exposed to widespread public awareness, the resulting chaos might create openings for resistance movements to organize and respond. They're planning a closed-door summit next month, Harper continued, a C9 emergency protocol meeting to finalize the Phase 3 trigger parameters. If we could intercept their communications during that meeting and broadcast the proceedings publicly, it would expose everything, I finished. More than that, it would force them to abandon their current timeline and revert to contingency protocols that are less well developed and more vulnerable to disruption. Harper outlined the technical challenges involved in intercepting the Council's communications. Their meetings took place in secure facilities with sophisticated counter-surveillance measures. The participants used encrypted communication devices that were regularly updated with new security protocols, and any interception attempt would almost certainly be detected, triggering immediate countermeasures against anyone involved in the operation. "I need you to understand," Harper emphasized, that this is likely a one-way mission. Even if we succeed in exposing their operation, we won't survive the aftermath. The Council has resources and capabilities that extend far beyond anything a conventional government could deploy. I stared out at the lake, watching the gentle waves lap against the shore. 3 weeks ago, my biggest concern had been meeting quarterly research deadlines. Now, I was contemplating a suicide mission to save human civilization from technocratic enslavement. When is this summit? I asked. April 15th. Location is still being determined, but intelligence suggests it will be at the Château de Bossé, about 20 kilometres outside Geneva. It's a World Council of Churches conference centre that's been used for sensitive meetings before. Harper handed me a final envelope thicker than the others. Everything you need to prepare is in there. Technical specifications, surveillance protocols, communication equipment. Study it carefully. Our success depends on flawless execution. As we parted ways for what would be the last time, Harper offered me a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my abbreviated life. You can still walk away, Julian. Disappear, create a new identity, and try to survive what's coming. No one would blame you for choosing self-preservation over martyrdom. I considered his offer seriously. I had no family, no romantic attachments, no obligations that would be affected by my disappearance. I could liquidate my assets, assume a false identity, and find some remote corner of the world where I might escape the coming transformation. But as I walked home through the streets of Geneva, I realised that escape was an illusion. There would be no safe havens in the world the Council of Nine was creating. Every corner of the globe would eventually be incorporated into their control grid. And even if I managed to survive the initial phases of their plan, I would spend the rest of my life knowing that I had possessed the knowledge and opportunity to resist, but had chosen cowardice instead. The next morning I submitted my resignation to the Arcus Foundation, citing family health issues that required my immediate attention. Eleanor Vasquez accepted my resignation, with what seemed like genuine regret, though I noticed she didn't press for details about my family situation. I spent the following 3 weeks studying Harper's materials and preparing for the mission. The technical challenges were formidable, but not insurmountable. The Château de Bossé's security systems were sophisticated but not impregnable. More importantly, Harper had provided me with detailed intelligence about the Council's communication protocols and meeting procedures. The plan was elegantly simple. I would infiltrate the chateau during the summit, establish a covert listening post in the building's communication infrastructure, and broadcast the Council's proceedings live to multiple online platforms simultaneously. The global exposure would make it impossible for them to suppress the information or maintain the fiction of legitimacy. April 15th arrived with an unseasonable spring snowstorm that provided perfect cover for my approach to the chateau. I'd spent the previous night in a small hotel in Séligny, using the time to conduct final equipment checks and mentally prepare for what was likely to be my final mission. The chateau was an imposing medieval structure surrounded by manicured gardens and modern security installations. Thermal imaging revealed the presence of at least 12 security personnel, along with the 9 council members and their personal staff. The building's communication systems were exactly as Harper had described. A central server room in the basement that handled all electronic communications for the facility. I made my approach through the gardens, using the snow and darkness to avoid the exterior security cameras. Harper's intelligence had identified a service entrance that was monitored but not heavily guarded. A simple electronic lock bypass granted me access to the building's interior. The next 30 minutes were the most terrifying of my life. Moving through the chateau's corridors while armed security personnel patrolled just meters away required a level of stealth and nerve that I had never before been required to demonstrate. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the hallways, every distant sound could have meant discovery and immediate termination. The server room was located exactly where Harper's blueprints had indicated. The communication equipment was more sophisticated than anything I had worked with before, but Harper's technical specifications were precise enough to guide me through the installation process. I had just finished establishing the connection to my broadcasting equipment, when the voices began echoing through the chateau's ventilation system. The meeting was taking place in what had once been the chateau's grand library, a room lined with ancient books and dominated by a massive fireplace. Through the building's internal communication system, I could hear every word with crystal clarity. Phase 3 implementation begins in 72 hours, announced a voice I recognised from Harper's recordings, Dr. Klaus Müller. Prometheus Systems has confirmed that the cyber attack vectors are fully operational and undetectable. Critical infrastructure across North America and Western Europe will be compromised simultaneously. The casual way he discussed the orchestrated collapse of civilization sent chills down my spine. These weren't desperate revolutionaries fighting against an oppressive system. They were the architects of oppression itself, calmly discussing the implementation of totalitarian control with the same tone I had once used to discuss quarterly budget projections. What about contingency protocols if the public response exceeds manageable parameters? Asked a woman's voice with a slight accent that could have been Scandinavian. Public response has been extensively modelled, replied another speaker. Current psychological conditioning levels indicate that 73% of the population will comply with emergency directives within the first week. An additional 19% will require moderate coercion, restriction of services, economic pressure, social isolation. Only 8% are projected to offer sustained resistance. My hands trembled as I adjusted the recording equipment. They were discussing the subjugation of billions of human beings as if they were managing a corporate restructuring project. The clinical precision of their planning made their intentions even more horrifying. The 8% resistance demographic will be addressed through Phase 4 acceleration, continued Muller. Enhanced surveillance protocols and predictive intervention algorithms will identify resistance cells before they can organise effectively. Those individuals will be transferred to controlled population centres for behavioural modification. And if behavioural modification proves insufficient, asked another voice. There was a pause before Muller responded. Then they will be reclassified as surplus population and processed according to Phase 5 protocols. Processed? They were talking about mass murder using the sanitised language of industrial efficiency. The conversation shifted to technical implementation details that were even more disturbing than the broad strategic discussion. They had developed sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques designed to make people grateful for their own enslavement. The economic collapse would be followed by a recovery program that would gradually introduce the new control systems as benevolent solutions to the problems they had created. The consciousness integration protocols show remarkable promise, reported a speaker, whose voice seemed artificially modulated. Test populations in controlled environments demonstrate complete behavioural compliance within 18 months of implementation. Individual identity dissolution proceeds according to projections, with subjects reporting increased satisfaction and social harmony. They had been experimenting on human populations. Somewhere in the world, there were communities that had already been transformed into the kind of managed livestock that the Council envisioned for all of humanity. What about the intellectual infrastructure? Asked another voice. Scientific research, technological development, creative production. These activities require some level of individual cognitive autonomy. Managed creativity protocols have been successfully implemented, came the response. Intellectual production can be optimized through selective cognitive enhancement of designated individuals while maintaining overall population compliance. The creative class will be a managed resource, like any other essential service. Even human creativity would be subordinated to their control systems. Artists, writers, scientists, and inventors would be reduced to biological machines producing innovations according to centrally planned directives. But it was the next part of their conversation that made me realise the true scope of their ambitions. The interplanetary expansion protocols require careful coordination with Phase 5 implementation, announced a voice I hadn't heard before. Optimal population levels for Earth-based operations must be maintained while developing sustainable colonies for the management class. They weren't just planning to control Earth, they were planning to expand their control system to other planets. The population reduction wasn't just about sustainability, it was about creating a manageable labour force, while the ruling class established themselves as the founders of interplanetary civilization. Mars colony infrastructure development is proceeding ahead of schedule, reported another speaker. The first management class settlement can be established within 15 years, with full operational capability within 30. Earth-based population levels can be reduced to maintenance requirements, while interplanetary expansion continues. The vision was breathtaking in its scope and horrifying in its implications. Earth would become a managed preserve populated by enslaved humans whose consciousness had been technologically altered to ensure compliance. Meanwhile, the architects of this system would establish themselves as the lords of a new cosmic empire, free from the limitations and messy complications of democratic governance. I was so absorbed in the horror of what I was hearing that I almost missed the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the server room. My blood turned to ice as I realised that someone was approaching my hiding place. The door opened slowly, revealing a figure in dark clothing carrying what appeared to be a sophisticated detection device. He swept the room methodically, his equipment clearly designed to identify unauthorised electronic devices. For a moment our eyes met across the server room. He was younger than I had expected, probably in his 30s, with the kind of athletic build that suggested military or law enforcement training. His expression was professionally calm, but I could see the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the situation. "Dr. Julian Stone," he said quietly. "You're not supposed to be here." I had been caught, but the recording was still active. My mission could still succeed if I could delay long enough for the broadcast to complete. "Neither are you, I'd imagine," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Unless you're part of their security detail." He smiled grimly. "I'm part of something else entirely. Someone who shares your concerns about what's happening in that room upstairs." The revelation that I wasn't alone in my resistance lifted a weight from my shoulders that I hadn't realised I was carrying. How many others are there? More than they know. Fewer than we need. He moved closer, keeping his voice low. "The broadcast is working. The signal is getting through to multiple platforms simultaneously, but they're going to detect the transmission within minutes, and when they do, we're both dead," I finished. "Probably, but the information will be out there. People will know the truth." From upstairs, we could hear the council's discussion continuing. They were moving into operational details for the immediate aftermath of the cyber attack. Emergency broadcast scripts, military deployment protocols, procedures for implementing martial law while maintaining the illusion of democratic legitimacy. "The public messaging framework is critical," Merla was saying. "The population must believe that the emergency measures are temporary responses to an external threat. Constitutional rights can be suspended indefinitely as long as the suspension is framed as protective rather than punitive." My companion, he had never given me his name, was monitoring the broadcast signal on a handheld device. "Upload is at 67% completion," he whispered, "but they're starting to scan for unauthorized transmissions." The voices from upstairs were becoming more animated, suggesting that someone had noticed the security breach. "We have a problem," announced a voice I hadn't heard before. "Our communication systems are showing signs of external access. Someone is intercepting our proceedings." The response was immediate and chilling. "Lock down the facility, search every room, find the source of the breach and eliminate it." 78% complete, my companion reported. "Just need a few more minutes." But we didn't have a few more minutes. The sound of heavy footsteps was echoing through the corridors as security personnel began a systematic search of the building. It was only a matter of time before they reached the server room. 85% complete, came the whispered update. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear radio chatter as the security team coordinated their search pattern. The voices were professional, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. 92% complete. A voice outside the door. "Check the server room. Full scan for unauthorized equipment. 97% complete." The door handle turned. "Upload complete," my companion whispered just as the door burst open. What happened next was a blur of violence and chaos that I'm still not entirely sure I remember accurately. Multiple armed figures poured through the doorway, their weapons trained on both of us with professional precision. My companion, the man who had helped me complete the broadcast, was shot immediately, his body crumpling to the floor without a sound. I raised my hands, expecting to join him in death, but the lead security operative spoke into his radio instead of pulling the trigger. "Package secured, bring him upstairs." They dragged me from the server room, through the chateau's elegant corridors, and into the grand library where the Council of Nine had been conducting their meeting. The room was exactly as I had imagined it, ornate, imposing, and filled with the kind of understated luxury that spoke of genuine power rather than mere wealth. The 9 figures were still seated around their mahogany table, but now their attention was focused entirely on me. In the better lighting, I could see their faces more clearly than I had in Harper's photographs. They were older than I had expected, mostly in their 60s and 70s, with the kind of well-preserved appearance that came from access to the best medical care money could buy. Dr. Klaus Müller rose from his seat, his expression combining disappointment with professional curiosity. "Dr. Julian Stone, we've been monitoring your research activities for some time. Impressive work, actually. You identified patterns that took us decades to establish." I said nothing, focusing on memorizing as many details as possible about the room and its occupants. If I somehow survived this encounter, I wanted to be able to provide accurate descriptions to anyone who might continue the resistance. "The broadcast has been successfully contained," reported one of the security operatives. "All major platforms have been contacted, and the uploaded content is being systematically removed. Estimated public exposure was minimal, fewer than 10,000 views before suppression protocols were implemented." 10,000 people. It wasn't much, but it was something. Somewhere in the world, 10,000 individuals now knew the truth about Project RESET and the Council of Nine. "Unfortunately," Muller continued, "your interference has created complications that require immediate resolution. The Phase 3 timeline cannot be adjusted, which means we need to implement enhanced security protocols to prevent further breaches." A woman at the far end of the table spoke for the first time. Her voice was cultured, with the kind of accent that suggested expensive education and international travel. "The Harper problem has been persistent for too long. This incident demonstrates that we can no longer afford to ignore opposition elements, regardless of how marginal they appear to be." Harper. My heart sank as I realised that my mentor in resistance had probably been captured or killed. The network of opposition that I had hoped might grow from our exposure had been compromised before it could develop. "Harper was terminated 6 hours ago," confirmed one of the security operatives, "along with 12 associated individuals identified through communication analysis. The resistance network has been effectively neutralised." The casual way they discussed murder was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire encounter. These weren't monsters or fanatics. They were bureaucrats implementing policy decisions with the same detached professionalism that I had once applied to demographic analysis. "Which brings us to the question of what to do with Dr. Stone," Muller said, returning his attention to me. "His knowledge of our operations is comprehensive, and his analytical capabilities are impressive. There might be value in incorporating him into our planning apparatus rather than simply eliminating him." The suggestion sent a chill down my spine that was worse than the threat of death. They were offering me the chance to become complicit in their plan, to use my skills to perfect the mechanisms of human enslavement. "The offer is genuine," Muller continued, apparently reading my expression. "Your research background makes you uniquely qualified to contribute to population management optimization. You could help us minimize the suffering associated with the transition process." "Minimise the suffering of genocide, you mean?" I replied, speaking for the first time since being brought into the room. "Genocide is an emotionally charged term that doesn't accurately describe our objectives," responded the woman who had spoken earlier. "We're implementing a comprehensive restructuring program designed to ensure long-term human survival. The current population levels are unsustainable, and democratic governance systems have proven incapable of addressing existential challenges." They genuinely believed they were saving humanity. The realization was somehow more terrifying than simple malice would have been. These weren't evil people. They were intelligent, educated individuals who had convinced themselves that totalitarian control and mass murder were necessary for the greater good. "The current global population of 8 billion will be reduced to approximately 1 billion within 30 years. Muller explained with the same tone he might have used to discuss quarterly earnings projections. The selection process will be optimized to preserve genetic diversity, intellectual capacity, and cultural heritage while eliminating redundant demographic segments. Redundant demographic segments? They were talking about 7 billion human lives as if they were excess inventory to be disposed of for efficiency purposes. The survivors will live in a managed environment free from war, poverty, environmental degradation, and social conflict, continued the woman. Individual autonomy will be replaced by collective optimization, ensuring that every person contributes to overall societal welfare according to their capabilities. And what about human dignity? I asked. What about the right to make your own choices, to pursue your own goals, to live your own life? Individual autonomy is a luxury that our species can no longer afford, replied Muller. The evidence is overwhelming. Democratic societies are incapable of making rational long-term decisions. Personal freedom inevitably leads to collective catastrophe. The conversation continued for another hour, with various council members explaining their philosophy and attempting to convince me to join their cause. They spoke eloquently about sustainability, efficiency, and social optimization. They presented detailed research showing the failures of democratic governance and the advantages of managed social systems. But beneath all their sophisticated arguments was a fundamental contempt for human nature itself. They saw people as problems to be solved rather than individuals with inherent worth and dignity. Their vision of the future was a world where every aspect of human existence would be optimized according to algorithmic calculations designed by individuals who considered themselves superior to the rest of our species. As the meeting concluded, Muller made his final offer. Join us willingly, and you'll be part of the management class that guides humanity through the transition. Your expertise will be valued, your contributions will be meaningful, and your survival will be assured. Refuse, added the woman, and you'll be processed according to Phase 5 protocols. Your knowledge makes you too dangerous to be allowed to live as a private citizen, but not valuable enough to preserve against your will. The choice was clear, collaboration or death. But there was a third option that they hadn't considered. I need time to think about it, I said. Muller nodded. You have until tomorrow evening, but understand that this is the only offer you'll receive. Choose wisely. They returned me to a secure holding room in the chateau's lower level, a comfortable but windowless space that was clearly designed for temporary detention. The door was locked from the outside, and I could hear the subtle hum of electronic surveillance equipment monitoring my activities. But they had made a crucial mistake. In their arrogance, they had assumed that I would either join them or passively await execution. They hadn't considered the possibility that I might have prepared contingency plans for exactly this situation. Hidden in the lining of my jacket was a small device that Harper had given me during our final meeting. A dead man's switch connected to a comprehensive data package containing everything I had learned about Project RESET and the Council of Nine. If I failed to check in with the automated system every 24 hours, the information would be distributed to thousands of recipients worldwide, including journalists, government officials, and activist organizations. The Council's suppression of my live broadcast had been successful, but it wouldn't be enough to contain the firestorm that would erupt when Harper's complete intelligence archive was released. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented, and too widely distributed to be suppressed through conventional means. As I sat in that holding room, contemplating my final decision, I realized that the 10,000 people who had seen my broadcast were more significant than the Council understood. In the age of social media and viral information distribution, 10,000 viewers could become 10 million within hours if the content was compelling enough. The resistance wasn't dead. It was just beginning, and the Council of Nine was about to discover that their carefully constructed timeline was no longer under their control. I spent that night writing a final message, using the time to document everything I had learned and experienced. If I was going to die, I wanted my death to serve a purpose. The message would be transmitted along with Harper's archive, providing context and human perspective to the technical intelligence he had gathered. The next evening, when Muller returned to collect my decision, I was ready. I've made my choice, I told him, and I choose resistance." Mellor's expression didn't change, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "That's unfortunate. You could have been part of something historically significant." "I already am," I replied, "just not the way you intended." The following text was recovered from Dr. Julian Stone's encrypted files and released as part of the Harper Archive disclosure. It represents the final transmission sent by Dr. Stone before his disappearance. "To whoever receives this message, my name is Julian Stone, and by the time you read this, I will probably be dead. But my death will serve a purpose if you understand what I'm about to tell you and act on that knowledge. Everything you've learned about Project RESET and the Council of Nine is true. They are not theoretical threats or abstract conspiracies. They are operational realities that are being implemented right now in the real world by real people with real power. The cyber attack that will trigger Phase 3 is scheduled to begin in less than 48 hours. When it happens, you will be told that foreign terrorists or hostile nations are responsible. You will be told that emergency measures are necessary to protect your safety and security. You will be told that the restrictions on your freedom are temporary responses to an unprecedented crisis. All of it will be lies. The attack will be orchestrated by the same people who will offer to save you from it. The emergency measures will be permanent features of a new system of control. The restrictions on your freedom will never be lifted because they were never intended to be temporary. But you have a choice. You can choose to believe the lies and accept the chains they offer you, or you can choose to resist and fight for the future of human dignity and freedom. If you choose resistance, you need to understand what you're fighting against. This is not a political movement that can be defeated through elections or legal challenges. This is a coordinated assault on human consciousness itself, implemented by people who have resources and capabilities that exceed anything most people can imagine. They control the media that shapes public opinion. They control the financial systems that determine economic stability. They control the technology platforms that facilitate communication and organisation. They have been planning this transformation for decades, and they have considered every possible form of resistance. But they have made one crucial error. They have underestimated the power of human consciousness itself. Individual awareness, when multiplied across millions of people, creates possibilities that no algorithm can predict or control. The key to resistance is understanding that this is fundamentally a spiritual battle disguised as a political conflict. They are trying to convince you that individual autonomy is selfish, that personal freedom is dangerous, and that collective management is more efficient than individual choice. Don't believe them. Your individual consciousness is not a bug in the human system. It's a feature. Your ability to think for yourself, to make your own choices, to pursue your own dreams and goals, is not a luxury that humanity can no longer afford. It's the essence of what makes us human. When the collapse comes, and it will come, remember that the chaos is artificial, and the solutions they offer are designed to enslave you. Organise locally, communicate privately, and maintain your individual identity at all costs. Most importantly, remember that you're not alone. All around the world, people are waking up to the reality of what is being done to them. The resistance is not centralised or organised in the traditional sense, but it is real and it is growing. The New World Order is not inevitable. It is simply the preferred outcome of people who have convinced themselves that they know better than the rest of us how we should live our lives. They are wrong, and if enough of us refuse to cooperate with their vision, they will fail. The choice is yours. Choose wisely. Choose resistance. Choose freedom. The future of human consciousness depends on it. Transmission ends. Addendum. The World Unity Day broadcast. The following transcript was recovered from archived television broadcasts dated 6 months after Dr. Stone's disappearance. The content has been verified as authentic by multiple independent sources. Good evening. This is Sarah Chen reporting for Global News Network with a special report on this year's World Unity Day celebration. Across the globe, millions of people are gathering to celebrate the remarkable progress we've made in building a more sustainable, secure and harmonious world. The past year has seen unprecedented cooperation between governments, corporations and civil society organisations in addressing the challenges facing our planet. The successful implementation of the Global Resilience Framework has provided stability and security for billions of people. while the Universal Basic Services Programme has eliminated poverty and inequality in participating regions. Behind me you can see thousands of happy families enjoying the festivities here in Geneva, grateful for the peace and prosperity that has been achieved through collective action and shared sacrifice. It's a remarkable testament to what humanity can accomplish when we work together toward common goals. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of today's celebration is the sense of unity and purpose that pervades the crowd. Individual concerns and selfish interests have given way to collective consciousness and shared responsibility. It's truly inspiring to witness. In the background, we can see representatives from the Global Coordination Council observing the celebrations. These dedicated public servants have worked tirelessly to ensure that the transition to our new social model has been as smooth and beneficial as possible. One figure stands out among the observers, a man in dark clothing who seems to be watching the crowd with particular intensity. Our cameras haven't been able to get a clear shot of his face, but his presence adds to the sense of careful stewardship that characterises our New World Order. As we conclude this special report, I'm reminded of the words spoken by one of our Global Coordination Council members just last week. The New World Order isn't coming, it's here, and it's working exactly as intended. This is Sarah Chen, reporting for Global News Network. Thank you for watching, and happy World Unity Day. Hello Night Wanderers and Digital Truth Seekers. Before we dive into tonight's story, I hope your day treated you well. What time is it where you are right now? Are you listening from a bustling city, a quiet suburb, or perhaps somewhere far off the grid? Wherever you are in this connected yet disconnected world, you've found your way to Sleep Theories, the place where we explore the stories that keep us awake at night. If this tale resonates with you, or if you simply enjoy having your reality questioned at 2 a.m, consider subscribing. We're building a community of those who dare to look behind the digital curtain. Now, settle in. Tonight's story is about 4 people who discovered something they were never meant to find. The retired military satellite KH-14B hadn't been active for 3 years. Officially decommissioned after budget cuts forced the Pentagon to consolidate their orbital surveillance network. So when Nova Chen's custom frequency scanner picked up an encrypted data burst, routing through its dormant transponder at 3:47 a.m, she knew someone was playing with fire. "Lynx, you need to see this," she calls across the converted warehouse that serves as their operations centre. The space looks like a digital graveyard. Servers humming in stacks, screens casting blue light across walls covered in network diagrams and corporate org charts connected by red string. Welcome to the underground. Lynx Rodriguez slides his chair over, steam rising from his 4th cup of coffee. At 32, his face carries the weight of someone who's seen the machinery of power from the inside. Former NSA turned whistleblower turned ghost. What's the signature? Military-grade encryption, but it's using deprecated protocols. Whoever sent this wanted it to look old, forgotten. Nova's fingers dance across 3 keyboards simultaneously. But the timestamp is fresh. Someone's using dead satellites to hide active communications. Jax looks up from their corner workstation, purple hair catching the monitor glow. How fresh! 15 minutes ago. The warehouse falls silent except for the eternal hum of cooling fans. Professor Kale emerges from the makeshift lab in the back corner, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. At 58, he's the oldest member of their group, a disgraced virologist whose career ended when he asked too many questions about certain pandemic-era research protocols. "Did you crack it?" Kale asks, approaching with the careful steps of someone who's learned to expect bad news. Nova's screen fills with cascading code as her decryption algorithms chew through layers of obfuscation. Almost. There. The file materializes. Project Aegis 2030.enx. Aegis, Lynx mutters. That's not good. Aegis was a classified program I remember from my NSA days. Theoretical population management scenarios. Theoretical, Nova repeats, clicking open the file. Let's see how theoretical it still is. The document unfolds across her screen like a digital autopsy report. Code fragments, data tables, implementation timelines. Her eyes scan the contents, and her expression shifts from curiosity to confusion to something approaching horror. Guys, she says, her voice dropping to a whisper, this isn't about surveillance, this isn't about control. Jack spins their chair around. What is it about? Nova's hands tremble slightly as she highlights a section of code. Variables with names like fertility, reduction, vectors, genetic selection, protocols, and population ceiling enforcement. It's about extinction, she breathes. Mass vaccination campaigns, supply chain disruptions, climate-based selection zones. She reads directly from the screen. Phase implementation. Reduce global population to sustainable levels through coordinated biological and environmental interventions. Target timeline 2030. Acceptable retention rate 6 to 8% of current population. The silence stretches like a held breath. 6 to 8%, Kyle repeats slowly, of 7 billion people. That's not population control, Link says, his intelligence training kicking in as he processes the implications. That's genocide with a spreadsheet. Nova scrolls deeper into the document, her face pale in the monitor light. There's more. Listen to this. This initiative represents a fundamental reset of the human species. Traditional methods of population management through war, famine and disease have proven insufficient to address the accelerating resource depletion crisis. Project Aegis represents a coordinated approach to ensure species survival through selective reduction. Species survival, Jax echoes. They're talking about us like we're livestock. No, Nova corrects, her voice hollow. Livestock are valuable. We're weeds they want to clear from the garden. Kale sits down heavily, his scientific mind wrestling with the implications. During his years researching virology, he'd seen enough classified projects to know that the line between theoretical and operational could be crossed with a single authorization signature. We need to verify this, he says finally. Cross-reference with known programs, trace the source, build a complete picture. If this is real, Nova finishes, we're looking at the greatest crime in human history, and it's already begun. Lynx pulls up his contacts, a carefully maintained network of sources still embedded in various intelligence agencies. I'll reach out to my people, see what chatter I can pick up. I'll dig into the technical specifications, Jax offers. These code fragments reference specific biological agents. If they're using existing research, there'll be traces in academic databases. Nova saves the file to their secure server and begins setting up multiple backup protocols. Professor, we need you to analyze the biological components. Your expertise might be the key to understanding how they plan to implement this. As the team disperses to their workstations, the weight of their discovery settles over the warehouse like digital smoke. They've stumbled across something that wasn't meant for human eyes, a blueprint for the end of the world as they know it. Outside, the city sleeps on, unaware that 4 people in a converted warehouse have just glimpsed the future, and it looks like a graveyard with Wi-Fi. Nova stares at the file name blinking on her screen, Project Aegis 2030.nc. In mythology, Aegis was the shield of Zeus, a divine protection for the gods. But protection for whom? And protection from what? As she begins her deep dive into the data, one phrase keeps echoing in her mind from the document's executive summary. This isn't about control, it's about resetting the species. The countdown, she realizes, isn't to some distant apocalypse. It's to tomorrow. 3 days of sleepless research have transformed their warehouse into a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Every wall now displays interconnected timelines, corporate hierarchies, and data flowcharts that would make a forensic accountant weep. Nova hasn't left the building since they cracked the Aegis file, surviving on instant ramen and the kind of caffeine-fueled determination that borders on religious fervour. I found the breadcrumbs, she announces, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. and chain-smoking cigarettes she bummed from links. The World Population Summit in Cairo, 1994. Most people remember it as a boring UN conference about reproductive rights and sustainable development. She pulls up archived documents on the main display screen, official transcripts, media reports, diplomatic cables, standard bureaucratic theatre. But look what happens when you dig into the closed-door sessions. A classified document appears, heavily redacted but with enough visible text to tell a story. The header reads, Adaptive Earth Framework, Preliminary Implementation Strategies. Cale adjusts his glasses, squinting at the screen. I remember this conference. I was a graduate student then, writing my dissertation on population genetics. There were rumours about private sessions, but nobody talked about what was discussed, Nova finishes. Except someone did. Deep in the diplomatic archives, buried under 17 layers of classification, I found this. She highlights passages that make the room's temperature seem to drop. Non-essential demographic drift must be addressed through coordinated intervention. Genetic dead zones present opportunity for selective resource allocation. Acceptable fallout parameters established at 85 to 90% reduction over 2-generation cycle. Project requires integration of medical, agricultural and environmental vectors. Jax looks up from their workstation, where they've been cross-referencing pharmaceutical patents. Nova, you need to see this. Those medical vectors they mention. I've been tracking the patent filings, and there's a pattern. They throw their research onto the shared screen. Dozens of pharmaceutical patents filed between 2018 and 2023, all connected to a web of shell companies, all related to mRNA modification technology. But here's the weird part, Jax continues. These patents aren't just for vaccines. They're for genetic modification systems that can be activated remotely, dormant until triggered by specific environmental factors. Cale's face goes pale. That's not possible. The technology to create delayed activation genetic modifications didn't exist in 2018, Jax agrees, but it does now. And according to these patents, it's been deployed. Nova pulls up another document from their Aegis cache. Remember, Professor, you mentioned seeing strange compounds in vaccine trials during the pandemic? Trials with non-public results? Cale nods slowly. There were inconsistencies. Control groups that should have shown specific immune responses but didn't. Novel proteins that had no apparent therapeutic function. When I raised concerns, you were discredited and forced out, Nova says. They called you a conspiracy theorist. Because I was asking the wrong questions, Cale realises. I was looking for immediate effects, but if these compounds were designed for delayed activation... Link slides his chair over, holding a printout of classified communications he's pulled from the old NSA databases. I've been digging through archived surveillance reports. Remember how during the pandemic, certain rural areas had unusually high vaccination rates, areas that normally resist federal health initiatives. He spreads out a map showing vaccination distribution patterns across the United States. Strange clusters appear in seemingly random locations. Rural counties in Montana, farming communities in Iowa, small towns along the Appalachian Trail. These aren't random, Nova says, studying the pattern. They're systematic. Someone was targeting specific populations. Or specific genetic profiles, Cale adds quietly. Jax's workstation chimes with an alert. Guys, I've been monitoring dark web chatter about unusual health trends. Look at this. They project a series of forum posts, social media reports, and medical anomalies from the past 6 months. Unexplained fertility drops in rural communities. Unusual autoimmune responses in adults aged 25 to 45. Regional variations in birth defects that don't match known environmental factors. Agricultural workers reporting mysterious illnesses that don't respond to standard treatments. Nova connects the dots on their shared display, drawing lines between vaccination sites, health anomalies, and demographic data. The pattern that emerges looks like a slow-motion biological weapon detonating across the landscape. They weren't just treating viruses, she says, echoing Cale's earlier words. They were treating the future human genome. Lynx pulls up another classified document, this one from a more recent surveillance operation. There's more. I found references to something called genetic compatibility mapping in Department of Homeland Security briefings. They've been collecting DNA samples through routine medical procedures and cross-referencing them with... He stops, staring at the screen. With what? Nova prompts. With survival probability models, he finishes. They're not just tracking who might survive their selective reduction, they're actively identifying who they want to eliminate. The warehouse falls silent as the implications settle over them like digital ash. They're not just looking at a conspiracy, they're looking at the implementation phase of humanity's final exam. And most of the class is about to fail. Kale stands up slowly, his scientific mind finally accepting what his moral instincts have been screaming. We need to understand the full scope. If they've weaponized the medical system, the agricultural system, the environmental monitoring system, then they've turned civilization itself into a weapon, Nova completes. As if summoned by their conversation, Jax's monitoring systems light up with alerts. Encrypted traffic spike on the satellite networks, same routing pattern as the original Aegis transmission. Nova rushes to her decryption station. They're talking again. If we can intercept this... The file downloads slowly, each percentage point feeling like an eternity. When it finally opens, it's not code this time. It's a video conference recording. Meeting minutes, Lynx realizes, from yesterday. Nova's hand hovers over the play button. Once they watch this, there's no going back. No pretending they stumbled across theoretical documents or academic exercises. Whatever's on this recording, she says, it's going to show us who's behind this, and what comes next. She clicks play. The screen fills with faces they recognise from news broadcasts and magazine covers. World leaders, tech billionaires, pharmaceutical executives, and scientists, all sitting around a virtual conference table discussing the end of the world with the casual tone of a quarterly earnings call. And in the corner of the screen, a countdown timer. 18 months, 14 days, 7 hours, 23 minutes. The clock is ticking, and they're about to learn exactly what happens when it reaches 0. The video quality is surprisingly good for something intercepted from a rerouted satellite signal. Crystal clear audio, HD resolution, perfect lighting. Almost as if whoever recorded this wanted it to be found by someone with the right skills and motivation. Nova adjusts the audio levels as familiar faces fill the screen. She recognises at least half of them. Pharmaceutical CEOs who've been in the news, tech moguls who've testified before Congress, government officials whose names appear in leaked documents weekly. But it's the people she doesn't recognise that worry her more. Faces that suggest power operates in layers the public never sees. Audio check, a voice says off-screen. We're recording for the archive. All participants have been verified through biometric confirmation. Proceed with briefing, responds a woman Nova recognises as the director of the World Health Organization. Phase 3 implementation status. A man in his 60s, distinguished silver hair, appears in a separate window. The nameplate reads, Dr. Harrison Vale, Protean Core Industries. Nova makes a mental note. She's never heard of Protean Core, which means they've done excellent work staying invisible. Phase 3 is proceeding on schedule, Dr. Vale reports. Biometric surveillance systems are now operational in 847 rural zones across 17 countries. Heat mapping, fertility tracking, and genetic sequencing capabilities are running at full capacity. Jax pauses their other work to focus on the video. Genetic sequencing? That's not something you can do remotely. Unless, Kale says slowly, you've already collected samples through other means. On screen, Dr. Vale continues. Integration with consumer health devices has exceeded projections. Voluntary data submission through fitness trackers, smartphones, and IoT medical devices now covers 73% of target demographics in developed nations. Nova feels her blood turn cold. She looks at the fitness tracker on her own wrist, a gift from her sister 2 Christmases ago. The little device that's been monitoring her heart rate, sleep patterns, stress levels. The device that connects to her phone, which connects to the cloud, which connects to... Smart device penetration in rural areas remains challenging, Dr. Vale continues, but our partnerships with agricultural technology companies have provided alternative collection methods. Genetic material harvested through routine veterinary procedures on livestock has proven surprisingly effective for human population mapping. What the hell does that mean? Jax whispers. Kale's face has gone ashen. Cross-species genetic contamination. If they're introducing human genetic markers into livestock, then tracking the animal genetics. They can map human populations through the food chain, Nova finishes. Every hamburger, every glass of milk, every piece of chicken carries genetic data. On screen, the meeting continues. A younger man, maybe 40, appears in a new window. His nameplate reads, Marcus Chen, Global Agricultural Systems. Nova notices the shared surname but feels no family connection, only revulsion. Agricultural vector deployment is exceeding expectations, Marcus reports. mRNA modification systems are now integrated into feed supplies for cattle, poultry and swine across North America and Europe. Human consumption data indicates 94% population exposure through dietary intake. Side effects, asks the WHO director. Minimal immediate impact as designed. However, fertility rates in test regions are down 23% year over year, with accelerating decline patterns. Autoimmune responses are appearing within expected parameters. Nova's hands shake as she realises what they're watching. These aren't plans being discussed. These are progress reports on operations already in motion. Lynx leans closer to the screen. That voice. I know that voice. A new participant joins the call, their video window appearing in the centre of the screen. The image is deliberately obscured. Shadows and lighting designed to hide identity. But the voice is clear and authoritative. Psychological conditioning remains our most effective vector, the shadowed figure reports. Media saturation campaigns have successfully normalised concepts of population reduction, climate-based selection, and voluntary extinction movements. Social media algorithms are amplifying despair, hopelessness, and anti-natalist sentiment across target demographics. Mental fatigue campaigns, the WHO director asks, exceeding projections. Suicide rates in target age ranges are up 34% year over year. Birth rates continue declining as planned. Most importantly, resistance to authority has decreased significantly. Population compliance with future directives is expected to be near universal. Jack stands up abruptly, knocking over their chair. They're not just poisoning our bodies, they're poisoning our minds. Nova pauses the video, needing a moment to process what they're witnessing. This isn't just biological warfare. It's psychological, social, environmental. They've weaponized everything we depend on to survive. Food, air, water, information, Lynx lists. They're not attacking civilization. They've turned civilization into the weapon. Kale sits down heavily, his scientific worldview crumbling and reforming around this new reality. The fertility decline, the autoimmune disorders, the psychological depression epidemics, it's all connected. It's all intentional. Nova resumes the video. The shadowed figure continues speaking. Phase 4. Preparation is nearly complete. Environmental triggers are in position. When activated, they will catalyse the biological modifications already present in target populations. Estimated timeline for full effect 18 months. The WHO director nods. Excellent. What about resistance potential? Minimal. Independent researchers who've approached relevant discoveries have been discredited, defunded, or eliminated from academic and professional positions. Media coverage of related topics has been successfully redirected toward established conspiracy theory frameworks, ensuring any accurate information is dismissed as paranoid delusion. Nova feels the walls of their warehouse closing in. How many others have found pieces of this puzzle? How many have been silenced? Dr. Vale, the shadowed figure continues. Status report on asset protection. Dr. Vale reappears on screen. Protection protocols are operational. All essential personnel and their families have received modified treatments. Genetic compatibility with post-implementation environment is confirmed. We estimate a protected population of approximately 500,000 globally. 500,000, Jax repeats numbly, out of 7 billion. The video quality starts to degrade as the satellite connection becomes unstable. But one final exchange comes through clearly. Any concerns about detection? Unlikely. The full scope of the operation requires integration of data from medical, agricultural, environmental, technological and psychological sources. No single research team or intelligence agency has access to all vectors simultaneously. Except, the WHO director adds with something approaching dark humour, they would need to be simultaneously expert in cryptography, intelligence gathering, virology, social engineering, and information systems. The shadowed figure laughs. The probability of such a team existing with access to the right data and the motivation to pursue it is essentially zero. The connection dies, leaving their warehouse in silence. Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kael look at each other across the digital evidence of humanity's planned extinction. "Well," Nova says finally, "I guess we're essentially zero." But as the four of them return to their workstations, preparing to dive deeper into the nightmare they've uncovered, none of them notice the small indicator light on Jax's communication system. The light that shows someone has been monitoring their network traffic. The light that means their essentially zero probability team has just become a confirmed threat. The light that means Phase 4 might be starting ahead of schedule. The warehouse's early warning system starts screaming at 4:17 a.m, 3 hours after they finished analysing the intercepted conference call. Nova jolts awake from her desk, where she'd fallen asleep reviewing genetic modification patents. The screens around her flash red as multiple intrusion detection systems trigger simultaneously. "Lynx!" she shouts, adrenaline cutting through exhaustion. "We've got company!" Lynx rolls out of his sleeping bag, grabbing his laptop and a go bag he keeps permanently packed, old habits from his intelligence days. "What kind of company?" "The kind that uses military-grade network penetration tools," Nova responds, her fingers flying across keyboards as she tries to lock down their systems. "Someone's been watching us." Jax appears from the back room, purple hair messy from sleep but their eyes sharp with focus. "How long have they been in our network?" "Unknown," Nova admits, fighting a losing battle against the intrusion. "But they've got root access to our communication systems. They've seen everything." Kael emerges from his makeshift lab, clutching a hard drive. "I've backed up all the biological data to an isolated system. If we lose the main servers..." "We're losing everything," Nova confirms, watching as file after file disappears from their local storage. They're not just infiltrating, they're sanitizing, removing all traces of what we've found. But even as their digital fortress crumbles around them, Nova's mind races ahead to their backup protocols. Years of paranoia have taught her to prepare for exactly this scenario. "Jax, activate the mesh network. Lynx, get the satellite uplink ready. We're going distributed." The warehouse transforms as hidden systems come online. What appeared to be a simple hacker den reveals itself as a sophisticated intelligence operation. Jax's workstation unfolds into a multi-array communication hub. Lynx produces equipment that definitely didn't come from civilian sources. Nova's desk reveals hidden servers and backup power systems. "Professor," Nova calls, "how much of your research is stored offline?" "Everything critical," Kael confirms. "I learned not to trust cloud storage after they destroyed my academic career." As their attackers continue dismantling their main systems, the team executes an evacuation protocol they've rehearsed, but hoped never to use. Critical files transfer to multiple secure locations. Communication channels shift to encrypted networks. Physical evidence gets packed into go bags. But Nova isn't running yet. Instead, she's doing something that would seem insane to anyone who doesn't understand her particular brand of digital warfare. She's tracing the intrusion back to its source. "What are you doing?" Lynx demands, watching her work as alarms continue screaming around them. "If they're watching us," Nova says through gritted teeth, "then we're watching them back." The screen fills with a network traffic analysis, packet traces, and routing information. The attack is sophisticated, routed through multiple proxy servers and anonymization networks. But sophistication creates complexity, and complexity creates vulnerabilities. "There," she breathes, highlighting a data stream. "They're not just stealing our files, they're uploading something." The upload completes just as Nova isolates the data stream, a single file placed carefully in their system logs where it would be discovered during any forensic analysis. Child pornography, Lynx realizes, reading the file metadata. They're setting us up. When law enforcement finds this place, we'll be dismissed as perverts and criminals instead of researchers, Nova finishes. Brilliant. Completely discredit us while making sure no one looks too closely at what we actually found. But Nova's trace has revealed something else, the real location of their attackers, and it's not some anonymous hacker collective or foreign government. They're operating out of the Protean Core building, she announces. Dr. Harrison Vale's company. The same people we watched discussing humanity's extinction 3 hours ago. Jax finishes packing their equipment. "We need to leave, now." But Nova is still working, her fingers moving with the desperate speed of someone who knows this might be their last chance. Not yet. If they're monitoring us in real time, if they know what we've discovered, then they know we're a threat, which means... Her screen fills with a new data stream. Not an attack this time, but intercepted communications from the Protean core building. They're having an emergency meeting, she realises. Right now, about us. She patches the audio through their speakers, and suddenly the warehouse fills with voices they recognise from the earlier recording. Confirmed they have the Phase 3 documentation, Dr. Vale's voice reports. Full technical specifications, implementation timelines, biological modification protocols. How is that possible? The WHO director's voice sounds strained. That information is compartmentalised across 17 different security classifications. Unknown, but their research capabilities suggest state-level intelligence resources. We may have a coordinated opposition. A new voice joins the call, the shadowed figure from the earlier recording, though now speaking with urgent authority rather than calm confidence. Irrelevant. They know enough to compromise the entire operation if they go public. We need immediate containment. What kind of containment? Dr. Vale asks. Total. The team, their research, their facility. Make it look like a lab accident. Chemical fire, explosion, whatever ensures complete evidence destruction. Nova's blood turns to ice as she realises what they're planning. How long do we have? The WHO director asks. Tactical team is en route, 20 minutes. Nova starts shutting down systems, her movements sharp with controlled panic. We're blown. They're sending a kill team. 20 minutes? Jax checks their watch. That's not enough time to... It's enough time to do one thing, Nova interrupts, pulling up her final contingency protocol. We can't save ourselves, but we can save the evidence. She begins uploading their complete research archive to a decentralised network. Blockchain-based storage systems that can't be deleted or controlled by any single authority. But the upload is massive, and their internet connection is already compromised. Upload time, 17 minutes, her system reports. 3 minutes to spare, Link says grimly, checking his weapons, if their timeline is accurate. But as if summoned by his words, new alarms start screaming. Motion sensors around the warehouse perimeter. Thermal imaging detecting multiple vehicles approaching from different directions. They lied about the timeline, Nova realises. The team is already here. Through the grimy windows, they can see black SUVs surrounding the building. Tactical lights sweep across the walls. Radio chatter echoes from outside, professional, coordinated, lethal. Upload progress, 32%, her computer announces. Nova looks at her team, her friends, her fellow travellers in the digital underground. Jax with their fierce intelligence and boundless optimism. Lynx with his warrior's honour and protective instincts. Kale with his scientist's dedication to truth above comfort. I need 8 more minutes to finish the upload, she says quietly. Can you give me 8 minutes? Lynx checks his rifle, the same model he carried during his government service. Against a professional tactical team, in an indefensible position. He looks around the warehouse, their home, their sanctuary, their last stand. Yeah, he says finally, we can give you 8 minutes. As the first breaching charges explode against the warehouse doors, Nova's fingers continue dancing across her keyboard, uploading humanity's final testimony to the digital wind. Outside, boots pound against concrete and orders are shouted in tactical shorthand. Inside, 4 people who stumbled across the end of the world fight to make sure someone, somewhere, will know what really happened to the human race. The upload bar crawls toward completion, 47%, 48%, Sasipgu Peosentu, and in the distance sirens wail, though whether they're coming to help or to clean up the mess, nobody can tell. Upload progress, 73%. Nova's fingers move across the keyboard with mechanical precision, even as automatic weapons fire tears through the warehouse's steel walls. Lynx and Jax have improvised a defensive position behind stacked servers, returning fire with a small arsenal Lynx maintained for exactly this scenario. Kyle crouches beside Nova, clutching his backup drives like sacred relics. How much longer? Lynx shouts over the gunfire, ejecting an empty magazine. 3 minutes, Nova responds, sweat dripping onto her keyboard as she maintains the upload connection, despite power fluctuations from damaged systems. A tactical team member appears at a broken window. Jax takes him down with a shot that would make their grandfather proud. The same grandfather who taught them to shoot cans off fence posts in rural Oregon, never imagining his lessons would one day be used to defend the future of human civilization. Upload progress, 81%. Nova! Kale shouts, pointing at the main screen. They're jamming our satellite connection. She looks up to see their upload speed dropping rapidly. The decentralized network storage is failing as targeted electromagnetic pulses disrupt their communication arrays. Years of preparation, layers of redundancy, multiple backup systems, all being systematically neutralized by an enemy who understands their capabilities better than they understand themselves. Switch to the hard line, she orders, pulling cables from emergency ports hidden beneath the floor. If the satellites are down, we go terrestrial. But even as she reroutes their connection through buried fibre optic cables, her screens show the truth. Their attackers aren't just soldiers. They're technicians, equipped with signal intelligence gear and digital warfare tools. This isn't a military assault, it's a surgical data extraction and elimination operation. Upload progress, 89%. They're inside the network, Nova realises, watching as files begin corrupting during transfer. They're not jamming the connection, they're poisoning it. Malicious code floods through their internet connection, targeting not just their local systems, but the destination servers themselves. Wherever they try to upload their evidence, the same destructive algorithms follow, erasing data as fast as they can transmit it. 90 seconds, Lynx reports, reloading his rifle. That's all I can give you. Nova's mind races through alternatives. Local storage, compromised. Cloud servers, compromised. Peer-to-peer networks, compromised. Everywhere they turn, the digital tentacles of their enemies have already reached. But there's one option they haven't tried. One network that exists outside the normal channels of internet communication. "Jax!" she shouts. "Emergency radio protocols. Can you reach the ham radio networks?" Jax nods, understanding immediately. While their enemies have prepared for digital warfare, they might not have anticipated analog communication methods, ancient radio technology that predates the internet by decades. As Jax frantically assembles radio equipment, Nova begins compressing their data files into formats suitable for audio transmission. Everything they've discovered about Project Aegis, the population reduction protocols, the biological modification systems, compressed into digital packets that can be transmitted over shortwave radio frequencies. Upload progress, 94%. Transmission corrupted. Their internet connection dies completely as electromagnetic pulse weapons finish destroying their communication arrays. But Jax's radio equipment sparks to life, connecting them to a network of amateur radio operators who maintain communication protocols independent of corporate or government control. "This is Emergency Station Alpha calling CQ Emergency," Jax broadcasts. "We have critical data for immediate relay to all stations. Repeat, critical data for immediate relay." Responses crackle back from radio operators across the country, retired engineers, electronics hobbyists, disaster relief volunteers, people who maintain the last truly free communication network on the planet. Nova begins transmitting their compressed data files, sending fragments to different radio operators with instructions for reassembly and distribution. It's slow, inefficient and incomplete, but it's working. Until the lights go out. Emergency power kicks in, bathing the warehouse in red light as their main electrical systems fail. Through the broken windows they can see technicians working on power lines, systematically isolating the building from the electrical grid. "They're cutting everything," Kale observes. "Power, internet, radio frequency spectrum, complete communication isolation." Nova's laptop switched to battery power, giving her perhaps 10 minutes of operation before total system failure. She continues transmitting data packets over Jax's radio equipment, but the process is agonizingly slow. "Nova!" Lynx calls urgently. "Movement on the roof. They're coming through the skylights." She looks up to see tactical team members rappelling through the warehouse's ceiling. Professional, coordinated, equipped with night vision and thermal imaging. In 30 seconds, they'll have complete control of the space. In 30 seconds, Project Aegis will remain humanity's best-kept secret. But Nova has one final option. One last desperate gambit that violates every principle of operational security she's ever followed. She activates her personal phone's livestream function and begins broadcasting directly to social media. "My name is Nova Chen," she says, looking directly into the camera as gunfire echoes around her. "If you're watching this, you need to know that the world's governments and corporations are planning to kill most of the human race." Her phone's screen shows viewer counts climbing rapidly. Hundreds, then thousands of people drawn by the chaos and violence of her livestream. They call it Project Aegis, population reduction through biological modification. They've poisoned the vaccines, contaminated the food supply, weaponized the environmental monitoring systems. Tactical team members breach their defensive position. Lynx falls, blood spreading across the concrete floor. Jax continues working the radio, transmitting data even as red laser sights dance across their chest. The timeline is 18 months, Nova continues, holding the phone steady despite the chaos. They've already begun implementation. If you've been vaccinated, if you eat processed food, if you use smart devices, you're already carrying the biological modifications they need to. A tactical team member's rifle butt smashes into her skull, sending the phone spinning across the concrete floor. The livestream continues, showing a sideways view of combat boots and spreading pools of blood, but the damage is done. In the 3 minutes her stream was active, over 50,000 people watched Nova Chen's final testimony. And in the age of social media, 50,000 becomes 5 million in a matter of hours. The last thing her phone's camera captures before the screen goes black is a gloved hand reaching down to pick it up. In the background, a voice speaks with calm authority. Sanitize everything. No evidence, no witnesses, no trace this facility ever existed. Then static, then silence, then nothing. 6 months later. The official report from the Woodland Fire Department described it as a tragic industrial accident. Improper storage of chemical solvents in a converted warehouse led to an explosion that killed 4 squatters and destroyed the building completely. Local news covered it for exactly 1 day before moving on to more compelling stories. The livestream that briefly appeared on various social media platforms was quickly removed for violating community guidelines against violent content and misinformation. Users who tried to share or discuss it found their accounts suspended or shadow banned. Within a week it had been scrubbed from mainstream platforms entirely. But the internet remembers everything, especially the things someone desperately wants forgotten. On encrypted message boards and dark web forums, fragments of Nova's final broadcast circulate like digital samizdat. Grainy screenshots, audio clips, transcribed quotes passed from user to user through carefully maintained networks of paranoid technologists and dedicated conspiracy researchers. Truth Seeker 2030 posts on an anonymous forum. Anyone else remember that warehouse livestream from 6 months ago? The girl talking about Project Aegis? Can't find it anywhere now, but I swear I downloaded a copy. Digital Ghost responds, had the same video. File corrupted when I tried to open it last week. All my Aegis research just disappeared, like it was never there. Red Pill Reality chimes in. Same here. But I remember what she said. Population reduction, biological modifications, food supply contamination, 18 months. We're down to 12 months now. The conversations multiply across platforms that exist in the shadows of the normal internet. Ham radio operators share fragments of the data Jax transmitted in those final minutes. Academic researchers quietly compare notes about unusual patterns in pharmaceutical trials and agricultural modifications. Environmental scientists notice anomalies that match the warnings from a warehouse that officially never existed. Dr. Sarah Martinez, epidemiologist at UC Davis, publishes a paper about unexplained fertility decline in rural agricultural communities. She doesn't mention Project Aegis directly, but her data matches the patterns Nova's team identified with unsettling accuracy. Professor David Kim at MIT releases research about novel proteins found in certain vaccine batches, proteins with no apparent therapeutic function. His funding gets cut 3 weeks later, and his department chair suggests he focus on less controversial research topics. Environmental journalist Lisa Chen, no relation to Nova despite the shared surname, investigates reports of unusual biometric surveillance equipment appearing in remote areas. Her article gets killed by her editor, who explains that the magazine's parent company has concerns about unfounded conspiracy theories. But each cancelled publication, each suppressed research project, each deleted social media post creates a new data point in a pattern that becomes hard to ignore. The truth spreads like a virus through the digital underground. 12 months later, Maya Patel is 17 years old and has never heard of Nova Chen, Lynx Rodriguez, Jax Morrison, or Professor Kale. She lives in a small village in rural India, where internet access is limited, and social media is considered a luxury for urban elites. But Maya is smart, curious, and has access to her school's computer lab 3 days a week. She spends her time learning about environmental science, genetic engineering, and the intersection of technology and biology. Her dream is to study at a Western university and help solve the world's agricultural challenges. It's during one of these computer lab sessions that she finds the flash drive, buried in a box of discarded electronics donated to the school, wrapped in plastic and electrical tape like someone tried very hard to preserve it. The label, written in faded ink, reads, Population 0 proof.vault. Maya plugs it into the computer, expecting maybe some students' old homework or family photos. Instead, she finds 847 gigabytes of encrypted data files, research documents, intercepted communications, and video recordings. She finds genetic modification protocols, pharmaceutical patents, agricultural contamination systems, and psychological warfare strategies. She finds the complete archive of everything Nova Chen's team discovered about Project Aegis. The encryption is military grade, but Maya is patient and clever. She spends 3 weeks cracking the access codes, working during lunch breaks and staying after school until the janitor kicks her out. When she finally opens the files, she spends another week just trying to understand what she's looking at. Population reduction through coordinated biological intervention. Genetic modification systems activated by environmental triggers. Food chain contamination designed to cause sterility and immune system failure. Psychological warfare campaigns to normalize extinction and reduce resistance to authority. A timeline that originally targeted 2030, but has been accelerated to 2027. Maya realizes she's looking at the blueprint for humanity's planned extinction, and according to the timestamps on the most recent files, the final phase is scheduled to begin in 6 months. She copies everything to multiple storage devices and begins the careful process of verification, cross-referencing patent filings, pharmaceutical research, agricultural modifications, environmental monitoring data. Every piece of evidence Nova's team gathered, Maya confirms through independent research. It's all true. It's all happening. And almost nobody knows. But Maya Patel is 17 years old, raised in a culture that reveres education and truth-telling above personal safety. She doesn't consider keeping the information secret. She doesn't wonder if she might be wrong. She doesn't worry about the consequences of speaking truth to power. She uploads everything to every platform she can access. WikiLeaks, anonymous file-sharing networks, academic databases, social media platforms, government transparency websites, journalist tip lines, activist organizations, environmental groups, medical research communities. She translates key documents into 17 languages and distributes them through international networks. She creates simplified summaries for non-technical audiences and detailed analyses for subject matter experts. She floods the internet with the truth about Project Aegis, and this time it's too late to stop the signal. Within hours, Maya's uploads are being downloaded thousands of times. Within days, the downloads become millions. Major news outlets pick up the story. Government officials demand investigations. International health organizations call emergency sessions. The carefully orchestrated plan to reduce human population through biological warfare becomes the most documented conspiracy in human history. Dr. Harrison Vale attempts to discredit the documents as sophisticated forgeries. The WHO director claims the communications were taken out of context. Government officials deny any knowledge of population reduction protocols. But the evidence is overwhelming, the documentation is comprehensive, and the verification is independent. Too many researchers, in too many countries, using too many different methodologies, all reach the same conclusion. Project Aegis is real, it's operational, and it's working. Global fertility rates have dropped 34% over the past 3 years. Autoimmune disorders have increased 78% in demographics that received certain vaccine formulations. Agricultural workers in modified crop regions show genetic markers consistent with engineered biological agents. Psychological depression and suicide rates have reached historic highs in precisely the age groups targeted by media manipulation campaigns. The population reduction protocol isn't a future threat. It's already killed millions of people. 18 months after the warehouse, Maya Patel stands before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, testifying about the greatest crime in human history. Behind her sits a display showing population statistics, fertility decline curves, mortality data, and genetic modification evidence. She holds up a small flash drive. the same one she found in a box of discarded electronics in her school's computer lab. This device, she tells the court, contains the complete records of Project Aegis, compiled by 4 researchers who died trying to warn the world about what was being done to us. She sets the drive on the witness stand. Nova Chen was 26 years old when she was murdered for discovering that our governments and corporations had poisoned the human race. Lynx Rodriguez was 32 when he died, defending her right to tell the truth. Jax Morrison was 21 when they gave their life to upload this evidence to radio networks around the world. Professor Kale was 58 when he was killed for asking the wrong questions about biological modification research. Maya looks directly at the defendants, pharmaceutical executives, government officials, and corporate leaders who sit in chains behind bulletproof glass. They died so that we could live. They died so that humanity would know what was done to us. They died so that the people responsible for the greatest genocide in history would be held accountable. She picks up the flash drive again. Their names were Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kyle. They saved our species, and they want you to remember that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the people who want to hide it. The courtroom falls silent as Maya's testimony ends. In the gallery, family members of victims weep quietly. In the press section, journalists furiously type stories that will reach billions of readers within hours, and in a small village in rural India, a 17-year-old girl's computer science teacher watches the live broadcast and smiles proudly at his former student. Sometimes the truth finds a way. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes 4 people in a warehouse can save the world, even after they're gone. Epilogue. The network remembers, 5 years later, the Maya Patel Institute for Digital Truth and Transparency occupies a gleaming building in New Geneva, funded by reparations payments from the corporations responsible for Project Aegis. Its mission statement, carved in stone above the entrance, reads, "The network remembers everything, especially the things someone desperately wants forgotten." In the lobby, 4 portraits hang side by side. Nova Chen, cryptographer and digital warrior; Lynx Rodriguez, intelligence analyst and protector; Jax Morrison, social engineer and technological prodigy; Professor Kyle, virologist and truth-teller. Beneath their portraits a simple inscription: "They found the code that wasn't meant to be found." Tourists and students pass by the portraits daily, most not knowing the full story of how 4 people in a converted warehouse prevented the extinction of human civilization. But the staff of the Institute know, the researchers working on digital rights and technological transparency know, the activists fighting against corporate surveillance and biological manipulation know. And late at night, when the building is empty and the servers hum quietly in climate-controlled rooms, network traffic monitors occasionally detect unusual patterns in the data streams. Fragments of code that shouldn't exist, routed through pathways that don't appear on any network topology. Some say it's just background noise, artifacts of old systems and deprecated protocols. Others believe it's something more, digital ghosts of 4 researchers who refuse to let death stop their work, still uploading, still broadcasting, still fighting to keep the truth alive in the spaces between the data. The network remembers everything, and sometimes, late at night in the digital underground, the network remembers back.